Okay, we're gonna go ahead and continue solving trig equations, and notice this one looks a little different because it has a cosine squared there. And when we do this one, we're gonna treat it as if it were a typical quadratic. Oh, I almost wrote cosine. Fix that. 2x squared plus x minus 1. And this is what we would call an AC split problem, but in pre-calc I've encouraged you to not use that process and start to work on just seeing what it is. So factors of 2 are 2 and 1. Factors of 1 are 1 and 1. I need a positive 1 in the middle, so that means my 2 needs to be positive and my 1 needs to be negative. You can check that by multiplying it out, but we get that equals 0. So we're going to do 2x minus 1 equals 0 and x plus 1 equals 0. So if I add 1 to both sides, 2x equals 1. Divide by 2, I get x equals 1/2. Subtract 1, I get x equals negative 1. Okay, all nice and easy there. When we have x's, we would be done. Let's go ahead and replace those x's with our cosines. Group this and make it a little bit smaller so it's out of the way. There's our work to get there. So let's go ahead and solve. Cosine of x equals 1/2 and cosine of x equals negative 1. So I'm going to look at the unit circle here. Cosine is our x value, so we need to figure out which angle has x as the short side, and that would be our pi over 3 angle up here. And then we need to think about where else it would be positive, and it's all students take calculus, so cosine would also be positive in the fourth quadrant, so down here. Okay, don't quite match up, but close enough. So we're going to use that to find our first couple answers here. Switch back to my red. Okay, so I get pi over 3 here, and then this one is going to be 2 pi minus pi over 3. So if I make that common denominators, I get 11. 2 times 3 is 6, guys, not 12. Sorry about that. Let's try that again. So 2 pi over 3, 2 pi minus pi over 3 gives me 6 pi over 3. So 6 minus 1 is 5 pi over 3. So those are our two answers here for this first one. So x is going to equal pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3. Cosine, remember, is our x value, so we need to think of when our x is negative 1. So if we think of our quadrantal angles, we have 1, 0, 0, 1. Sorry, that looked kind of crazy. Negative 1, 0, and 0, negative 1. So we need to find when our x is negative 1, which is at our 100-degree angle, which is pi. That only happens once. So those are our final answers. Let's try another one. This is very similar to seeing 4x squared minus 1 equals 0, which is a difference of two squares. So we can do 2x plus 1, 2x minus 1, and solve those. So I get 2x plus 1 equals 0, and 2x minus 1 equals 0. So x equals negative 1/2, and x equals positive 1/2. So I have two equations there. Sine of x equals negative 1/2, and sine of x equals positive 1/2. This one's a little bit easier because both of them have the 1/2 there. So really we need to find our reference angle and then just use that to find the angles in all four quadrants. So sine is 1/2 at our pi over 6 here. Okay, our y is the short side. So at pi over 6, that happens here, first one, for positive. If we go to this angle here, this is going to be pi minus pi over 6. Our reference angle here is going to be pi plus pi over 6. And our angle using the reference angle here is going to be 2 pi minus pi over 6. The reason I'm including all four of those is because I have a positive 1/2 and negative 1/2. So this would be positive 1/2, this would be positive 1/2, this would be negative 1/2, and negative 1/2. So let's go ahead and figure out those answers. We have pi over 6. 6 pi over 6 minus pi over 6 is 5 pi over 6. 6 pi over 6 plus pi over 6 is 7 pi over 6. And 12 pi over 6 minus pi over 6 is 11 pi over 6. And those are our four answers. Okay, notice that it helps if you really know your unit circle there. Last one we're going to do together. I'm actually going to flip over. No, we'll do this without flipping to the calculator, I think. No, let's do it on the calculator. I'm going to move this 3 tangent of x over. So I have tangent of x sine squared of x minus 3 tangent of x. And you know what? Let's not do it with a calculator. We'll just go ahead and do this really quickly. And that's going to equal 0 now. Notice they both have tangent in there. So tangent of x times sine squared of x minus 3 equals 0. So I can do tangent equals 0 and sine squared minus 3 equals 0. So we'll come back to this. We're going to do sine squared of x equals 3 and sine of x equals the square root of 3. Now if you think of your unit circle, you don't know where that happens, right? That never happens on your unit circle. So we're good because square root of 3 is bigger than 1, so it doesn't even work in our bounds. So we can't even do this. We just need to figure out when tangent is 0. Sorry, sidetrack on my thought. Okay, so tangent is sine over cosine. So you need to think of when sine over cosine would give you 0 rather than undefined. So I need to know when sine is 0 and cosine is not 0, which would be this one and this one. So that happens at 0 and at pi. You're done. Okay, go ahead. Practice solving those equations without calculators. Let me know if you need any help. Have a great day.